The dog that came from the stars wasn't looking for love. On the edge of the old town of Wildermere, where the street lamps flicker just a second longer than they should and the wind always smells faintly of burnt wood, a strange light streaked across the sky one autumn night. It wasn't a shooting star, at least, not one anyone could wish on. It moved too slowly, too deliberately, like it was looking for something. Or someone. 12-year-old Marnie stood barefoot on the cold wooden porch, her hands wrapped tightly around a chipped mug of cocoa. The light arced down and vanished behind the woods near her backyard. Silence followed, heavier than before. She didn't scream when the knocking came an hour later. It was too soft for a person, more like claws on wood. She opened the door. There it sat, a dog, or something that wore the shape of a dog. Its fur was thick and jet black, glistening unnaturally under the moonlight. Its eyes, glowing faintly blue, held an intelligence that made Marnie's spine stiffen. She couldn't explain why she stepped back to let it in. It wasn't loyalty. It wasn't pity. It wasn't even fear. It was compulsion. The dog stepped inside like it had been invited, like it had always belonged. The next morning, Marnie's mother found her curled up next to the creature on the living room rug. She screamed, of course, threatened to call animal control. But one look into the dog's eyes and her mouth snapped shut. He's just a stray, her mother muttered, unsure of her own voice. They called it Comet. That week, strange things began happening in Wildermere. Cats vanished. Birds stopped chirping. People whispered that the woods no longer felt right, that the air hummed with something foreign. And every night at exactly 3:03 a.m., Comet would sit up and stare at the sky, growling at stars no one else noticed. Marnie began to change, too. She stopped going to school. She didn't sleep. She only spoke when Comet was near. She'd sit for hours beside him, her eyes glazed over like she was listening to something only she could hear. Then came the dreams. She dreamt of fields of ash, of massive gates made of bone and light, and of a voice, not deep, not loud, but cold, whispering her name again and again. She dreamt of stars falling like raindrops. And always, in the center of it all, was Comet, not as a dog, but as a towering creature with too many limbs and eyes that bled light. And in those dreams, it was always smiling. One evening, Marnie's older brother, Jace, finally confronted her. That thing isn't a dog. It's not even alive, Marnie. Comet stood behind her, silent. You're just scared, she said flatly. Comet came to protect me. He told me. Told you. Jace scoffed. You're losing your mind. But that night, Jace was the first to see what Comet really was. The next morning, he was gone. His bed looked untouched, save for a trail of ash paw prints leading out through his window. By now, the town had started to panic. Flyers with missing children popped up overnight. Trees turned black at the roots. Dogs barked madly at nothing. And at night, something howled, not like a wolf, but like metal grinding against bone. Still, Marnie kept smiling. Comet was always beside her, never barking, never growling, until someone got too close. Mrs. Alden, the nosy neighbor, made the mistake of peeking into their house one night. She wanted to see the dog that everyone whispered about. She never got further than the living room. Her body was found the next day, slumped in her own kitchen, her eyes burnt white and mouth stretched open in a silent scream. The only clue left behind was a single black paw print on her hardwood floor. The police asked questions, but nobody had answers. Except Marnie. He warned her not to look inside, she said softly. Comet wagged his tail. One night, Marnie's mother tried to get rid of him. She loaded him into her car and drove out toward the river, swearing under her breath, hands trembling on the wheel. The dog sat still in the back seat, not barking, not resisting. By the time she reached the old iron bridge, she could no longer remember why she came there. Her hands felt distant, her vision blurred, and then she looked into the rearview mirror. Comet wasn't a dog anymore. She never came home. Back at the house, Marnie was waiting, already brushing ash off the floor. She opened the door before Comet even scratched. You didn't have to hurt her, she said quietly. Comet blinked once, and Marnie understood it wasn't up to her anymore. But it was too late to turn back. Marnie no longer felt afraid. She no longer missed her brother, or her mother, or her old life, because in her dreams, She saw something bigger, something calling her, something beautiful in its horror. And in the center of that vision was Comet. Except now he had her face. After her mother vanished, no one came asking questions. No police, no concerned neighbors, no school officials wondering where Marnie was. Wildemere had begun to forget things, people, events, even time itself. Days bled together in gray fog. The sky stayed overcast, even when the sun should have burned bright. And through it all, Comet sat at the window like a silent guardian or a watchman. Marnie stopped speaking altogether. She only communicated through her journal now, its pages filled with swirling symbols that no one alive could read. When she did move, it was slowly, as if adjusting to a gravity that wasn't made for human bones. Then one morning, a sound echoed through the house, the static click of the old radio in the attic, one that hadn't worked in 10 years. Marnie looked up from her journal. Comet was already climbing the stairs, each step creaking like the bones of a long-dead thing awakening. The attic door was ajar, though Marnie didn't remember opening it. Faint music hummed through the static, a lullaby in a language older than sleep. Inside the attic sat a figure, or rather, the shadow of one. Human-shaped but wrong in its posture, too still, too angular, and lacking any defined features. Its head turned slowly toward her. Then it spoke. "You are marked by the devourer," it rasped. "The host of lightlessness watches through the hound." Comet didn't growl. He bowed his head. The shadow continued. "You brought the offering. Now you must finish the becoming." Marnie's voice cracked out for the first time in days. "Becoming what?" The shadow only smiled, splitting its featureless face open into a chasm of black. Then it disappeared, not with a sound or flash, but like it had simply slipped sideways out of time. The radio fell silent, but Marnie's ears wouldn't stop ringing. From that day on, the changes in her body were no longer subtle. Marnie's reflection no longer mirrored her movements. Her eyes, once brown, now shimmered faintly blue. When she slept, if she slept, she could hear the breathing of 1,000 unseen things pressing against the walls of her house. But she was no longer afraid. She was preparing. At night, Comet would lead her to the forest, to a clearing that didn't exist on any map. A circle of stones, each one inscribed with runes that glowed when touched. And in the center, a pit of scorched earth that pulsed faintly like a dying heartbeat. There, she practiced the rites. Sometimes she'd chant. Sometimes she'd draw symbols with animal blood. Sometimes she would simply listen. And what she heard made her smile. Across Wildemere, people were losing their memories. A child forgot her own name during a spelling test. A man walked into the woods and returned hours later with no idea where he lived. A gas station attendant looked in the mirror and screamed for 30 minutes because the reflection wasn't his. And every time it happened, a black paw print was found nearby. Not on the ground, on walls, ceilings, mirrors. The townsfolk started whispering again. They blamed the girl with the dog. They blamed the house where no light stays on. But they never acted, because they couldn't remember why they were afraid. Marnie wasn't alone in the house anymore. The shadows moved even when the lamps were off. Whispers echoed from vents and drains and behind closed cupboards. The TV flickered on randomly at night, showing static-filled visions of dead cities beneath a dying sun. Sometimes, her brother's voice echoed faintly from the walls. Other times, her mother's laugh distorted hollow. Comet never left her side. He was no longer pretending to be a dog. Not really. When he blinked, galaxies blinked with him. When he growled, radios shorted out across the county. And when he sat at the window, stars outside flickered as if watching him back. Then, on the 7th night since her mother's disappearance, the sky opened. Not with thunder or lightning, but with a wound. A vertical tear across the sky above Wildemere, dripping darkness like ink into the clouds. It hovered silently, a scar across reality, and from it came a low, rhythmic hum like a heartbeat broadcast across the heavens. People dropped to their knees. Some wept, some screamed, some simply wandered into the forest, never to return. And in the clearing, the stones began to glow. Marnie stood in the center, her eyes shining like 2 dying stars. Comet sat beside her, his form flickering between canine and something that defied shape or physics. From the wound in the sky, something stirred. A hand, long-fingered, skeletal, covered in eyes and mouths. It didn't reach through, only pressed against the barrier between worlds, feeling for a crack. And Marnie understood. She wasn't the sacrifice. She was the key. The next morning, the local church burned down. The priest, who'd once warned the town of the sins walking in dog's flesh, was found suspended upside down from the bell tower. His mouth had been sewn shut with thread made of hair and regret. Below him, someone had carved a message into the pews. "We came not for your love. We came for your end." At school, teachers tried to mark Marnie absent, but the attendance sheet filled itself out. At the grocery store, her face appeared on every cereal box for one terrifying second before vanishing. And at night, through every phone screen in Wildermere, a pair of glowing blue eyes appeared for just a flicker. Watching. Always watching. One day, Marnie stood at the mirror. Her reflection did not move. Instead, it spoke. "You are ready." Then it reached out of the mirror and touched her hand. Her skin rippled like water. Comet barked once, sharp, final. The stars above Wildermere blinked out one by one. Wildermere was dying. Not all at once, not with flame or flood, but with forgetting. Entire blocks of houses stood silent and empty, though no one could remember who lived there. Roads curved in directions they never used to. Streetlights flickered even in daylight. Clocks ran backward. And Marnie had stopped pretending to be human. She no longer wore shoes. Her feet had toughened, blackened slightly, the soles cracked like cooled obsidian. Her voice, when she spoke, which was rare, came out layered, echoed, like something whispered through a canyon of time. And Comet, he was changing, too, growing taller, his body elongated unnaturally, limbs gaining too many joints. His shadow had mass now, staying visible even in pitch black. Sometimes, it moved separately from him. Still, no one stopped them, because no one remembered how. One evening, the fog came. Not mist, not drizzle, but fog like breath from a dead god's mouth. Thick, warm, humming with static. It rolled in at dusk and didn't lift for 3 days. During that time, the town's boundaries melted. People who tried to drive out came back an hour later with no fuel and no memory of why they left. Phone signals collapsed. Birds stopped flying overhead. And in the silence, the old language returned, graffiti etched into bark, into concrete, into skin. Marnie saw it etched into her own arm one morning. He walks on lightless paws. The nights grew louder. Whispers clawed at windows, not voices exactly, more like thoughts someone else was thinking in your head. Screams came from underground storm drains. One morning, the town's water tower had split open like a peeled fruit, revealing that the inside was not filled with water anymore. Instead, stars and teeth. Then came the Friday harvest. That was what Comet called it. Anyway, the first time he spoke in full voice. It happened around 3:13 a.m., when every animal in Wildermere went silent. Crickets, dogs, owls vanished into stillness. And the sky bled. Not red, but something darker, more alive. The clouds peeled back to reveal a second moon, glowing violet and pulsing with tendrils. A choir of unseen children sang a lullaby in reverse. And beneath it all, people stepped out of their homes in a trance and walked toward the woods. No one saw them again. Except Marnie. She followed them. The forest had changed. What had once been pine and ash was now bone and rot and vines that whispered. The air shimmered with heat, but the ground was frozen. The path led her to a clearing where dozens of people knelt before a massive tree. No leaves, no bark, just raw, throbbing flesh. It pulsed like a heart, and from its branches hung things that were not quite human anymore. And at the base of a tree stood a mirror, 7 feet tall, framed in old gold, covered in blinking eyes. Marnie walked to it, and saw herself, but not herself. A version, taller, crowned and void, eyes like galaxies unraveling. A cloak made of star-choked mist, hands with too many fingers, and in her arms, a dog no longer Comet, but something greater, made of teeth and stardust and memory. "You are becoming," the reflection said. "I'm not afraid," Marnie whispered. "You will be." That night, her house disappeared. One moment she was brushing her hair, and the next, nothing. No bed, no roof, no floor. Only space. Endless. Cold. Ancient. And floating there, across from her, were other children. Dozens of them. Some still wore pajamas. Some had burns. Some had no eyes. All of them stared at her with the same silent understanding. They, too, had answered the call. They, too, had met the dog. When she blinked, she was back in Wildermere. But something was off. The town was mirrored, a reverse copy. Buildings reversed, people walking backward, talking in loops. And in the middle of the town square stood a statue of Comet, regal and terrifying, inscribed with the words, "We loved him until we knew what he was." Marnie touched the statue and remembered everything. Her brother's disappearance. Not a coincidence. He'd found the pot in the basement. The silver pot etched in alien geometry, the one that doubled anything placed inside it. He had put in his pet hamster. 2 came out. He had put in a slice of cake. 2 came out. He had put in a bird. 2 came out. Except one had no feathers and no eyes. And then he had put in Comet, or rather, something that looked like Comet, because what came out of the pot wasn't a dog. It was a summoning. A gateway. The real Comet was never a pet. He had been waiting. Marnie remembered her brother screaming. How the lights had flickered. How her mother had tried to stop it. How the other, Comet, had smiled when he opened his mouth and whispered, "Now you'll remember what stars fear." Her brother didn't vanish. He was taken. And now Marnie was finishing what he started. Not because she wanted to, but because the key had already turned. In the mirrored Wildermere, time no longer flowed forward. Marnie stood in her school gym, watching versions of herself blink in and out of existence, some covered in feathers, some in smoke. She saw one version dragging chains of light, another laughing while her eyes dripped ink. Then Comet appeared beside her. But he wasn't a dog anymore. He was tall, cloaked, human-shaped, but with a snout, a grin stretching from ear to ear, stars orbiting his shoulders like flies. "You were never meant to stay small," he said. "What happens now?" He pointed up. The sky cracked again. This time, something began to descend. The thing descending from the sky wasn't a ship. It wasn't even a creature. It was a memory, too large and ancient to be held by any world. It cracked the stars open like eggshells. Pieces of constellations rained down, splintering time and sense. The clouds parted, not with wind, but with screaming, the kind that existed before sound had ever been born. Marnie shielded her face as the sky peeled back, revealing a void beyond black. And in that void an eye, immense, blinking sideways. And it saw her. Wildermere unraveled under its gaze. The roads melted into rivers of ash. Homes dissolved into glass dust. The people, those who hadn't already vanished, wandered into mirrors and never came out. Only a few remained, those marked, like Marnie. And they were changing. Marnie watched as her skin began fracturing, thin golden cracks tracing her body like veins of molten ink. Her fingertips shimmered like star fragments. She no longer cast a shadow. "I can't go back, can I?" she asked the thing that used to be Comet. Comet, now fully emerged from his disguise, tilted his head. His voice sounded like multiple mouths speaking in unison. "You never belonged to that timeline. You were borrowed. Now you're being collected." The statue of Comet in the town square cracked open. From inside came bones. Gigantic. Fossilized. Not canine. Not human. Something older. One by one, they rose into the air, orbiting the broken monument. With each rotation, the bones clicked into place, like a puzzle assembling itself across dimensions. Each time they connected, a voice boomed from the heavens. "The child has bloomed. The offering is accepted. The wound will be opened again." Marnie staggered back, clutching her ears. But there was no pain, just clarity. She remembered before she was Marnie, before the earth, before breath, before bodies. She remembered being a fragment of hunger, drifting through nebulae with others like her, consuming starlight and story, feeding on the emotions of dying planets. They were called many things by many worlds. Star shepherds, skinwalkers, the kind watchers, the dogs beneath the dust. But they all share the same truth. They took what was offered. And long ago, Earth had called to them. But Earth forgot, until the pot was opened. "You were the seed," Comet said. "You were planted in human skin. a child grown like bait in a field of forgetfulness. But now the harvest is ready. What am I harvesting? Comet smiled. Fear, memory, death. The three offerings that open the way. Marnie shook her head. No, I didn't agree to this. You were never asked. In the ruins of the town library, something stirred. Marnie felt it, even before she saw it. A pull, like the gravity of a collapsed sun. She followed the call. The streets no longer held pavement. They were veins now, pulsing with blood-thick fog. Trees whispered her name in reverse. Inside the library, the shelves had twisted into spines. Books wept black ink. And at the center, laid out like a sacrificial altar, was her mother's locket. Marnie picked it up. Inside were two faces, hers, and her brother's. But the eyes had been scratched out. Beneath the locket was a note in her brother's handwriting. Don't forget who you were, even when you become something else. Marnie fell to her knees. She remembered the nights they whispered secrets under the blanket fort. How he called her Starbug. How they dreamed about flying away, about escaping their small town. She remembered love. Real, human, messy, aching love. Not something the sky could consume. And she screamed. It wasn't fear. It wasn't rage. It was defiance. The eye above blinked. The void trembled. And somewhere, something in the mirror world shattered. Comet stepped toward her. What are you doing? Marnie stood. Her skin glowed now. Not gold, not silver, but something older, a color no one had seen since the first collapse of light. I'm not the seed anymore, she said. I'm the gardener. You cannot contain what you were meant to release. I don't need to contain it. She held up the locket. I need to redirect it. And then the mirrors broke. Every reflective surface in Wildemere shattered at once. Car windows, puddles, bathroom tiles. Each broken shard now showed a different timeline, one where Marnie had never been born, one where she never opened the pot, one where Comet never arrived, and one where her brother lived. Comet hissed, his body unraveling slightly. You're disrupting the feed. Good, Marnie said. Because I finally understand. She turned to the eye in the sky. You don't come to devour. You come to feed. On fear. On pain. On what we think we deserve. She clenched the locket tight. Well, I remember everything now. The eye shuddered and blinked once more. Suddenly, the broken bones stopped orbiting. The voices went silent, and Comet fell to one knee. What have you done? He rasped. I gave back what you stole. Marnie stepped into the beam of light descending from the sky, no longer paralyzed, no longer pulled. She walked freely. You wanted fear. I gave you choice. You wanted death. I gave you memory. And now, you're not in control anymore. The locket opened again. Inside it was not her brother's face, but her own, older, wiser, a woman now, and behind her a world healed. No fog, no missing towns, just a sky full of stars and no comet. Marnie smiled. I'll find you, she whispered to her future self. I'll make this real. And with that, she stepped into the mirror. Behind her, the ruins of Wildemere vanished. The void sky peeled itself shut, and Comet wept, because for the first time in all his lifetimes, he was alone. Marnie stepped through the mirror and felt herself unravel. Not like breaking, more like becoming. Her bones didn't dissolve. They rearranged. Her thoughts stretched like constellations mapping new galaxies. She could hear the hum of unformed timelines, smell the electric scent of possibility. And when her eyes opened, she was nowhere and everywhere, suspended in a space that pulsed like a living heartbeat. 1,000 realities swirled around her like ink in water, some where the stars were gentle, some where the stars hunted. In all of them, something was missing, and she understood. She had to decide what would fill that absence. Starbug. She turned. He stood there. Her brother, unchanged, alive, untouched by the devourers. Tears stung her eyes. But it wasn't really him. It was a fragment, a projection, a piece of a choice. You brought me back, he said softly. But not just me. You brought everything that could be back. Marnie stepped toward him. You're not real. I'm as real as you need me to be. She held the locket in her hand again. Only now it was glowing. Each time she blinked, it shifted shape, from a key, to a compass, to a flame. It wasn't just memory anymore. It was a seed of creation. You're standing at the fracture point, her brother said. Whatever you do next becomes the new law. Around her, echoes of Comet stirred. Not as a dog, not even as a god, but as a hunger, that eternal, star-born instinct to take, devour, and forget. You can become what he was, her brother warned. You've inherited the code. You are the sky now. Marnie shook her head. No, I won't consume. I'll remember. Then you'll suffer, he said, stepping closer. Because remembering hurts. It means loss. It means letting go. Tears traced glowing paths down her cheeks. I know. The void pulsed. And then, Comet appeared. Not a dog, not a demon, but a shape-shifting wound stitched together by galaxies. His voice no longer echoed. It simply existed, like a law of physics. You could become everything I was, he said. You could be loved by every planet, worshipped across timelines. You could end suffering by ending choice. That's not love, Marnie said. That's control. He snarled. You're still just a girl. No, she said, lifting the locket turned flame. I'm a story, and stories fight back. Suddenly, the space around her darkened. The realities trembled. A storm of erased timelines came hurtling toward her, visions of her own death, the destruction of worlds, billions of lives lost to the sky hunger. It screamed to be made true. Choose safety, Comet begged. Choose silence. Choose me. But Marnie stepped forward. Her bare feet touched a floor that hadn't existed a second before. A bridge made of words. Each step she took rewrote reality. She whispered as she walked. Let the stars stay in the sky. Let the monsters stay in their mirrors. Let love return to the places it was stolen. Comet lunged. But the flame in her hand expanded, not into fire but into memory. Shared. Distributed. Free. Suddenly, the people of Wildermere remembered. They remembered the stars, the vanished towns, the fog, the sacrifice, and they chose to live differently. The flame shot across timelines, infecting other versions of Earth. And one by one, across every reflection, people refused to forget. Comet began to shrink, because what he fed on was ignorance. And now, they remembered. The dog was gone. All that remained was a flicker of starlight, and then, even that faded. Marnie stood alone in the center of the new sky. You did it, her brother said quietly. You rewrote the ending. I didn't want to, she admitted. I just couldn't bear the old one. He smiled, and this time it was real. Because now choice was real. You're not a monster, he said. You're a mirror that didn't break. The locket in her hand pulsed once, then dissolved. She turned toward the path of stars before her. It looked like a road made of glass and galaxies. Where does it go? She asked. Anywhere you want, her brother said. But if you walk it, you can't come back. She turned, looking back at Wildermere, whole again. Her house rebuilt, her mother waiting on the porch. The wind soft. I already left, she said. Now I get to begin. And so Marnie walked, not as a seed, not as a god, not even as a girl, but as a story. The story that remembered, the story that refused to be erased, the story that taught the sky to feel,